Washington's clear-thinking headquarters. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
8:37 on WMAL. Good Tuesday morning to you, Brian Neiman. Tony Blakely in this morning. Joined now by Larry Kudlow, host of the Kudlow Report. See him at 7 o'clock on CNBC. Also on the call 11 this morning on CNBC. And host of the Larry Kudlow Radio Show here on WMAL Saturdays at 7 o'clock. So a big interview yesterday, Larry, with Nancy Pelosi. You seem to be happy with what she told you. Why?
Well, she seemed to be moving into the center. It's very interesting to me, at least at the level of rhetoric. She's talking about budget cuts and deficit reduction, and the only people she wanted to tax were the big oil companies. And she favored at least Obama's version of drill, drill, drill. So I just saw a more centrist Nancy Pelosi. It was great fun. I love having interviews with her.
Is that because she was in New York and she was talking to business people yesterday?
Well, I don't know. She was making the rounds. I'm not sure what her schedule was. But I've interviewed her several times in the past, though not recently. And we always get along very well, right. I might add, much as we may disagree. But I did hear a more centrist Nancy Pelosi, which I found interesting. All
right, we ran up to the debt ceiling yesterday, and the bond market did not fall apart. So what do we make of that?
Look, bonds have been rallying.
I know.
I mean, frankly, this whole debt ceiling business is the catastrophe that's supposed to happen has been a non-event. I mean, bonds have been rallying for weeks and weeks and weeks, mostly, I might add, on fears of an economic slowdown. And, I just think this catastrophe scenario for the debt ceiling lacks credibility. And I think that the Treasury Department has plenty of ways to finagle around the debt ceiling for the next couple of months. And also, if all else fails, revenues are coming in. In fact, they're picking up a little bit from corporate tax revenues, personal receipts, and even capital gains. So I think you've got a solid couple of months before you come close to hitting some kind of borrowing wall. And I really, I just think this is an overrated issue. The GOP, in my opinion, is right to squeeze spending cuts and spending limits. That's their job, to fix the long-term problem.
Lawrence, this is Tony. I agree with you, but if we got to the last week of July and it didn't look like the two parties were getting any closer to resolving it, wouldn't you think at that point, and I understand that the markets might react. Now, I understand, obviously, we only pay about $200 billion in interest, and we take over $2 trillion in revenue, so we could always pay the interest on our bonds.
Yeah.
But wouldn't the international bond market get pretty spooked if we actually were approaching the August break and had no deal in the offing?
I have no idea. I mean, there's so many other issues out there. The inflation rate, the rate of the economy, what's going on in Europe or China. I wouldn't even want to speculate on that. I know that Tim Geithner is making that case, and you got some Wall Street people making that case, although the very famous and extremely successful Stanley Druckenmiller, he's a hedge fund guy, gave an interview in the Journal to Jim Freeman that said, you know what, even technical default, he doesn't favor that, but he said if you had some kind of missed payments for a week or two, if that's what it took to settle the long-run problem, that would be a good thing. That is, nobody wants default. Nobody wants default, but I'm saying the bond market wants to see, I don't know what the bond market wants to see. All I'll say is that from the standpoint of good policy, you've got to deal with the underlying causes of the borrowing binge. That's the key point, and they've got at least a couple of months. If I had to guess, they got through September. And by the way, they can also cease and desist any new borrowing. All they have to do is keep making that declaration, as they did yesterday, which allows them to disinvest in a bunch of the trust funds. They haven't even tapped the trust funds. I think they just may have started yesterday to get them along for weeks and weeks, months and months. That's what they did in the middle 1990s.
All right. What do you make of this IMF mess, the arrest in New York, what it means for the bank, and should there be some kind, the role the United States should play in this, an impossible replacement for the head of the IMF now as well?
Well, look, the United States owns close to 20% of the IMF, and I don't think in recent years we've used our clout properly. This terrible sexual assault thing that's going on with Strauss-Kahn, that's going to be settled in the courts, okay? I'm more interested in the policy matter.
Right.
And the policy matter is the IMF has gone even further than it has in the past with the bailouts of Greece and the bailouts of Ireland and the coming bailout of Portugal. And I think the U.S. government, the administration, the Treasury, and the Congress have got to take a more active interest in what the IMF is doing with our taxpayer money, number one, and number two, as a matter of general policy, because I don't think these bailouts are accomplishing much, if anything. And we're watching Greece come back now. See, Strauss-Kahn was the leader of the bailout group in Europe. As a French socialist, that was his thing.
Yeah.
He was always pushing Angela Merkel around, the German chancellor, who didn't want to do this, and I might add, whose complicity in these European Union's IMF bailouts has hurt her at the polls enormously. So we need to take a stronger look at what the IMF... You know, the IMF was never intended to be bailout nation or central planning agency. The IMF was formed after World War II to stabilize the world currency system, where the dollar was the international currency and was linked to gold. The mission changed in the 70s, and it's continued to change since then.
Now, so that means that the president of the IMF does have a lot of clout, it sounds like, from what you're saying. I've heard some people say that someone from one of the emerging countries, perhaps India or Brazil, should take a lead at the IMF. Would you be in favor of something like that?
Well, again, I don't... Look, I'm okay with that. There's some decent names being put out there. One of them, by the way, is Mohammed Al-Arian, who runs PIMCO.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy. But the person running it is not important as the policies. There's a whole board... there's an executive board of the IMF which makes the decisions. Now, of course, that's shaped by the executive director, in this case, Strauss-Kahn. But the United States has played a very dull role in that for some reason. We have the presidency of the World Bank, that's Bob Zoellick, and we give up the IMF spot. That's wrong. We have to have much bigger say in policy, and we have to have bigger policies. These bailouts of European countries are not helping. I mean, Greece hasn't changed its position. They haven't changed its position. Maybe Ireland has. Greece certainly hasn't. Will Portugal change its position? I mean, it's like bailing out New York and New Jersey and California. Is that the right thing to do? I don't think so. And again, we're on the hook. Actually, in some sense, it's almost 25% of their reserves. But in a technical sense, the United States owns 18% of the IMF. And we should be much more aggressive in setting policy.
All right, Larry. Good to talk to you as always. We'll be watching tonight.